In this step, let's look at adding a to-do controller and adding a JSP for the to-dos as well. That's what we would be focusing on here. So we'll create a to-do controller, add a to-do service, and add a list todos.jsp as well. So let's start with creating the model that we would want for the to-do service, which is the to-do. So I would want to create a to-do object. I'll create it in a package. So I'll start with new class. The name is to do. The package I would want to use is not login because we want to start with to do. So to do and finish. So I have now a to do. There are a number of attributes of to do that we want to manage. We want to have an ID. We want to have a user. Whose to do is it? We want to have a description for the to do. We would want to have a target date for the to do and check whether it's completed or not. For date, I would want to import, so I'll press Ctrl 1 and import Java util date. So these are all the things that I would want to manage in a to-do. So I want to have a bean with all these attributes. Now, I would go ahead and create a few utility methods. Focus a little more in here because what we would do is we would make use of Eclipse source generation feature. So right click, we want to generate the getters and setters. How can we make Eclipse generate that? Is right click, source, generate getters and setters, and do a select all and press OK. That's it. You have all the setters and getters for this particular beans. Now I would also want to generate something else. I want to generate a toString method. How do I generate that? It's the same. Right click, source, generate toString method. As simple as that. So now we are going to generate the toString method as well. We want to use all the 5 attributes, and instead of using string concatenation, I'll change it to string.format or something else. That's not a problem. So now we have a very good toString as well. So I'll also add in here, it's coming from toString. So I'll say toString to do, so that whenever we see this, we know it's coming, where it's coming from. So it's coming from toString. So that's good. So we now added in getters and setters, toString, and we would want to add a couple of methods which are equals and hash code as well. So the same, right click, source, generate hash code and equals. In hash code and equals, I would want only to check for ID. If the ID is same, they're equal. If ID is not same, they're not equal. So I just want ID in the hash code and equals methods. So I just say OK. You'd see that Eclipse has done a lot of magic for us. There are a lot of methods which are present in here. Get, set, toString, hash code, equals. These are all the things that Eclipse provided us with. Eclipse created for us. And I would recommend you to look at the code for them and see that you understand them clearly. Basically what we have done is created getters and setters. We have created a toString so that everything when I do a sysout on a to-do, it prints everything which is inside the to-do. And the last one which we did was to compare to-dos. When we compare two to-dos, if the IDs are same, then they are equal. If they are not, then they are not equal. In an ideal world, whenever you override the equals method, you're also supposed to override the hash code method. So we also overridden the hash code method as well. The logic of the equals and hash code methods can be a little complex because those are the things which Eclipse generated for us. So don't worry about them if you do not understand them completely. Now, we would want to be able to manage these to-dos. So what I would do is I'll create a service to manage the to-dos. So I'll start with to-do service. So that's what we would want to create, to-do service. And the to-do service, I would want to manage all the to-dos. As far as this particular course is concerned, what we would do is we would not really connect to a database. What we would do is we would create a static list and we would try and use this list as the database. Whenever we add a to-do, we would add to the list. Whenever we delete a to-do, we would delete from the list. Whenever we want to modify something in the to-do, we would modify it in this particular list alone. What we have is a sample to-do service implementation on our GitHub repository. So if you go in GitHub, there's a small piece of code which would help you in setting up this to-do service. What we'll try and do is try and do it a little quickly because this is not really the core logic that we want to focus on. We want to learn Spring MVC, and to-do service is just simple Java code. So let's kind of quickly try and do this in. So what we have is a to-dos, which is a new array list, and let's copy this code in quickly. So what we have until now, you would see is I have a list. The list is an array list of to-dos. So I'm creating an array list of to-dos. It's a static thing, and I'm having a count of them. How many of them? 3. And I've statically initialized these to-dos. So you'd see that I'm initializing them right here. I'm making use of the constructor. Unfortunately, the constructor is not yet there in the to-do, so let's go ahead and create the constructor. So again, right click, source, generate constructor using fields, and press OK. So now the constructor is there. So you'd see that the to-do service also compiles properly. So we are creating a to-do with ID 1, name of the user is in 28 minutes. What he wants to do is learn Spring MVC, and a new date, I mean this is the target date. For now we will hard code it to today, and we'll say false. So is it complete? No. So we have created 3 such to-dos, to-dos.add, and we have added them in a static. Because there is a static list, I can't initialize them in a constructor, so I have to create a static block to initialize them. So I've created a static block where these are initialized. Now we would want to quickly add a couple of methods to add and delete from this particular list. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and come in here. So first let's add a add to do method. So we would want to add a to do. So to add a to do, what we need is name, description, target date, and is done. So what we would do is we would increment the to do count also in this method, and name, description, target date, and is done. So this method simply adds the new to do to the list. So to the static list, whenever you call this method, it would add the new to do to it. Delete to do is a little bit more complex thing. So what it needs to do is it needs to loop around the list and identify the one with the right ID. So we are using an iterator and not an enhanced for loop, because if I use the enhanced for loop, it would result in a concurrent modification exception. If you want, you can give it a try. So what we are trying to do in here is we want to delete a to do with this particular ID. So and this would loop through the thing, and if the to-do.getID is equal to ID, then it would be removing that particular thing. So I'll import the iterator as well, java.util.iterator. So we have the add to do, delete to do. The last method which we will be adding in is the retrieve to-dos for particular user. So we want to be able to retrieve the to-dos for a specific user. So how do we do that? The way we would be doing it is by looping around the list and checking if the username matches. So if for this user, if the username matches, then we would add the to do in. So the code might really look complex, but actually this to do service is very simple. So basically we have a static list to which we have a couple of methods defined, actually 3 methods defined: add to do, delete to do, and retrieve to do's. We will make use of these methods in the subsequent steps when we call the to do's and show them on the screen. What I would recommend you to do is to pause this video here and look at the to do service code and see if you don't understand anything. It's actually quite a simple piece of Java code. If you are well versed with Java, this should be very easy piece of code to understand. Now that the boring part is done, we have the to do and the to do service. Let's get to the interesting part. That's basically creating the controller which would be handling the to do request. So what I'll do is I'll copy the login controller. So I'm pasting it into the to do thing, and I'll rename it also. So I don't want to call this the login controller. I'll call this for now to do controller. I think that's, let's go ahead and continue. There'll be a few problems in here. We'll fix them one by one. So in here, I don't want to use the login service. What do I want to use is the to do service. So I'll change it to the to do service. One thing which we forgot when we did the to do service is we want this to be managed by Spring as well. We will not create an instance of the to do service. How do we do that? Add service. So let's add a service in here, and here we want to auto wire it in. So that's perfect. The URL which we'll use for the to do controller is, the first thing we want to do is list the to do's. So what we want to start off with is listing the to do's on the page. So we don't want to really handle the post first up. So all that we would want to do is handle the request for listing the to do's. So what I'll say here is list to do's, and I'll redirect it to a page called, why do I need to call it something else? List to do's as well. Before I redirect it to the list to do's page, I would also want to add some data to the model. I would want to get the get the to-dos for a particular user and show them on the page. So I would want to pass the list of users, list of users to-dos to the page. How do we do that? Think again. We need to use the modal map. So let's go ahead and modal map modal, and I would want to add the to-dos. So I would want to add the to-dos, add attribute to-dos, and how do I get the to-dos? Is by calling the service dot retrieve to-dos for a user. What we did in the retrieve to-dos is it would be comparing with the user. So let's hard code the username in for now. So let's not worry about who has logged in and all that kind of stuff. Let's not really worry about it. Let's hard code it in. So let's hard code the retrieve to-dos in 28 minutes. We'll really add in authentication and really remove the hard coding at the later point in a subsequent step. But for now, let's start hard coding it in. So I would hard code in 28 minutes as the username for whom we have to retrieve the to-dos. So when the method is invoked, it would return back 3 to-dos. So what we have done until now is we have added in a controller. So we have added in a controller with a service which is auto-wired in, and also we have given it a URL list to-dos, and we have added the to-dos to the model, and we are redirecting it to a list to-dos.jsp. So let's quickly go ahead and create the JSP list to-dos.jsp. I'll copy the welcome.jsp and call it list to-dos.jsp. And in the to-dos, what we want to show? We want to show the to-dos. So your to-dos are, for now let's not worry about the formatting of them. We are using something called expression language. I'm putting something in the model, so it's available on the view. So all that I need to do is dollar open brace the name of the attribute in the model, close brace, and it would print the content of it on the screen, especially because we have implemented the toString method for it. So since we have implemented the toString method for to do already, so it uses the toString method and it generates the whole thing up. So let's start the server and see whether all that we are doing is working fine. Let's go ahead and start typing on our URL. So our URL now is list to-dos. So localhost colon 8080 list to-dos. Aha, it's actually showing welcome and password is. Why is it so? Think about it. I think I made a mistake. So now list to-dos is here, and we said return list to-dos. What we did is instead of changing the to-dos.jsp, we changed it welcome.jsp. So I interchanged the text. Let's exchange the text quickly. Okay, now let's refresh the page and see what's happening. Okay, that's great. So it's printing your to-dos are, it's coming from the toString that you can see in here. So it's saying, showing all the to-dos. So what we are able to do now is we are able to get a list of to-dos from the service, and we are showing them on the screen right now. This is not really a well formatted thing. It's not really a page which is even decently formatted. Don't worry about it. We are actually making a lot of progress towards making this application very well formatted. So we'll do that in the subsequent steps. In this step, what we tried to do was to set up the framework for the to-do controller. So we have done that. We have created a list to-dos method, and we have now redirected to it, and we have now also have a to-do service which is returning the data back to us and which will help us to edit data at a future point in time as well. And we have a list to-dos.jsp which is not formatted very well, but it's showing something to the user. Let's be happy with it. Until the next step, bye-bye.